So this morning, as we come into Christmas, I'm still looking at different carols. And we didn't sing it this morning because we've sung it earlier Bruce did it a couple of weeks ago. But this morning we're going to be looking at Away in a Manger. So we started by looking at the first Noel and how the angel of the Lord appeared to the shepherds in Luke 2, announcing the birth of Jesus. So today we're going to look at Away in a Manger. And this carol, I just want you to think about it as we're going through and the words of the carol and what it means as we sort of explore a little bit in Luke still about Away in a Manger and what that means. So we read in Luke 2 verse 7, "And she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn." Who has ever gone somewhere and found that when they got there that it was sold out or there was no room or there was no space? I can remember a number of times I'd want to go to see a movie and you'd arrive not necessarily late, but if it's a popular movie, people had already bought all the tickets and you would have to look at the board and you'd see sold out, sold out, sold out. And some days you couldn't even get in to see. And that's frustrating because this is the days before internet when you could look up and buy online. So you didn't know until you got there that you couldn't actually see the movie that you wanted to see. And you would build up, there'd be an element of excitement, there'd be an element of expectation, and then you would get there and it would all just flood away. It seems very trivial to us, but imagine how Joseph and Mary must have felt as they were travelling into Bethlehem. Mary really at a stage in her pregnancy where she should not have been travelling, she should have been resting up somewhere, and they arrived at the place they were going to stay only to be told that there's no room there for you. So Mary comes into this place, she's about to give birth to the Saviour of the world, and the Bible is very clear that there was no room in the lodging for her. So Jesus was born away in a manger. The siren's going to go off. They're doing their toy run, so it's going to be continuous. So this is pretty odd for the Son of God entering his own world. So here we have the Son of God, God himself, coming down to earth, and he's entering his own world, his own creation, and he's entering it into a manger. So today we have a look at the significance behind the manger and this birth scene. So the manger in itself points to someone unique. It points to someone unique. So to understand the significance of the manger as unique, we need to revisit our passage from my last message. And if you remember there, we have the angel of the Lord said to the shepherds this about Jesus. He said, "And this will be the sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in clothes, laying in a manger." So the angel is letting the shepherds know that they'll recognize Jesus by two things. Firstly, he'll be wrapped in cloth, strips of cloth. So swaddling cloths in those times tended to be strips of cloth that they would wrap around in a certain way that would bundle someone up. Now we get similar things, but it tends to be one big piece of cloth that you wrap around. So the first thing that they'll recognise him by is that he'll be wrapped in cloth. And the second thing is that he will be in a manger. So what we do know, and we know this because the Romans started to keep quite good records, and there was a few people in that time that kept good records, is that at the time that Jesus was born, in this particular area, most babies were wrapped in swaddling cloth. Most babies would have been the same. So the angel's pointing that out wasn't anything special. The shepherds would have been like, that's every baby. How are we going to narrow this down? How are we going to know that this is the child that you're referring to? And that was where they added the second thing, where they said that they would find him born in a manger. So this in itself, even in that time, was unique. It was odd. It was out of place. Because wouldn't you have, if you had someone come into your home and they were heavily pregnant, you don't put them in the most uncomfortable place in the house. You move someone else who is able, and you put the pregnant person where they're going to be comfortable, even a new parent where they'll be comfortable. You don't hold them out of that place. So even in that time, this was odd. This wasn't something that would have happened because the manger area of the home was dirty. So if you picture a house, they would have had an area sort of like our stage here where there would have been a drop down, and up the top there would have been the living area, and it may have been partitioned into rooms, it may have been all open, it varied house to house, but the animals lived in the manger, which was down, and it was lower, and they were in there, one because it was secure and it was safe for them, but also it helped provide warmth in the house and keep the house warm. So down there was dirty. It would have been covered in, whatever type of animal they had. They would have been doing their business there. They would have been living there. It would have been fur dropped everywhere. It wasn't a clean place. It is not somewhere anyone would want to bring a baby into the world with, let alone the mother in that situation as well. The risk of infection and disease would have been off the charts in an era where that was already an issue. The manger was never intended to be a bed for the child. It was for feeding the animals that lived in that lower part of the house. The first place the Son of God laid his head on our earth was in this manger, a place to feed animals. But why? Why would this be the case? Because God, in all his power, could have planned any other way for Jesus to come into the world. He could have had a grand place of residence. He could have had a palace even. As they were walking in, they could have met someone rich, and God pulled them into a place where they could have somewhere clean and sterile to have for Jesus to arrive into our world. Couldn't the Saviour of mankind have a more hospitable place to breathe his first breath? And the answer lies in a phrase, and you've probably heard this, and you've probably even said this: there is no one like Jesus. Jesus in himself is unique. So he couldn't come into the world in the same way anyone else was, because he was unique. Everything about Jesus' life was to give a message. According to the passage, the angels saw fit to announce that Jesus would be born with cloth and manger, and they gave this to the shepherds as a sign. And I did a quick search. There is no record that I could find anyway of another king in history being born this way. They just weren't. They're born in castles, they're born in grand houses. If they happened to be on the move or nomadic people, they tended to have big, elaborate tents. They were always born to and with people of importance. Even if they weren't princes to start with, and that happened later, they were always with or born to people of importance. So Jesus is completely unique in this way. We have no other option but to believe that Jesus Christ is like no other, because here arrived the true King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, and he wasn't born into a great palace. He wasn't born into great luxury, but he was laid in a manger. The manger also points to the cross. So it doesn't just reflect Jesus' birth and his immediate situation. So it's not just a reflection or a snapshot in time of what was happening there. It points to the cross. The manger points us to a scene to come in Jesus' life, one that would prove to be the utmost of importance. And to better understand the manger cross connection, we need to look to Paul. So Paul writes this in the book of Philippians in Philippians 2, verses 6 to 8. who, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his advantage. So in his very nature, he was God. He was equal to God. He was there, but he did not consider that to be something to be used to his advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. So God was coming to earth, and he didn't hold himself, even though he was equal to God. Jesus didn't say, this is who I am, this is what I am, this is everything that I've been, so I'm going to come that way to earth. No, he didn't count himself that way, and he humbled himself, and he lowered himself, lower than servants, lower than slaves, and he was born into a manger, something that even the lowest of the low of that time wouldn't have been expected to do. Christ not only took the position of slave or servant, but in the case of a manger, he went even lower. He took a position that was lower. God, who was all-powerful, creator of heaven and earth, not only decided to enter into a broken world full of broken people like you and me, but he takes it a step further, and he does it in the humblest way possible. And we see this reflected through Jesus' ministry, and Luke loves to mirror. Luke will take things that have happened in the beginning and he'll mirror them at the end, and he will show Christ's nature through this mirroring. And we see this when we get towards the end of Jesus' ministry and he rides into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. Rather than being the center of a massive entourage, rather than entering like a triumph like the Romans would do when there was victory at hand, he came in on the back of a donkey because he wanted to model to us the way that he wants us to live. He wanted to model that humility. This is how I live, so this is how you should live. You've probably heard the phrase, so-and-so came from humble beginnings. So someone who's made themselves and came up, and they'll say, oh, they came from humble beginnings and look at them now, look at what they've achieved. It means that they didn't have much to start with. In the case of Christ, he had everything possible at his command. Jesus did not come from humble beginnings, but he gave it all up and came to earth so he could show us what true humility looks like. This humble beginning in the manger leads to another humble position on the cross. It was Jesus' humility that allowed him to go through with the cross at the end. Rather than resisting arrest and the trial and the torture and everything else he had to put up with leading to his crucifixion, Jesus chooses the Father's way and will that included another humble position. So we see the manger. It points to Jesus' humility. It shows from the very beginning that he humbled himself. It shows from the absolute start that he was going to live a life of humility. And we see that echoed through the Gospels as we read just acts of humility after acts of humility. Finally, with the cross, the ultimate act of humility. The manger also points to disciples, and it seems a little bit odd that you sort of wonder how does it sort of point to the disciples, but it does. And we've talked a lot about humility, and what we know about God is that he often chooses the most unlikely people for his purposes. So we look around and we can see God work, and I am sure, because I've done this, I'm sure most of us at a time have seen God moving in something and we've thought, oh, I never thought they would have used whoever that was for that. That just doesn't, God will use the most unlikely person. That's not saying there's anything wrong with the person that we're saying this about, but it might be in an area that we never saw them operating in. It could be that they're demonstrating a skill that we had no idea that they even had, because God will use the most unlikely people and he'll include them in his purposes. As we read through the manger scene in the Gospels, it includes several different people. There's a number of different people that we see in that scene, from Jesus' earthly parents to the wise men to a number of different people. But the most significant are those who first received the message about Christ's birth, the shepherds. We could certainly understand if God had decided to reveal Christ's birth first to kings or to the priests or the leaders in the area. It would have made sense to us on a human level that would have been who he told everyone that Jesus was here. But instead, he shows us again his upside down kingdom. God wanted to show that everything that we'd taken for normal, everything that man had set up, was going to be flipped on its head in his kingdom. And he did this by choosing to reveal Jesus' birth to simple shepherds. These were men that were nowhere near the top of the social structure. They were tasked to watch over sheep. And although sheep were a key part of life back then, they were involved in food, they were involved in clothing, and probably most importantly, they were for temple sacrifice as well. They could not have operated as a society without sheep. But shepherds often did not own their own property. They would travel from place to place. They would live in tents. They were nomads, simple people with straightforward jobs, and they were close to the bottom of the rung in the social structure. And yet these were the people that God chose to be the first evangelists of the message of Christ's birth. These were the people that God went, these are the ones that I'm going to send out into the world to herald and announce the arrival of my son. We read in Luke 2:17, when they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child. So they heard the message from the angels. They went and saw Jesus, and they sat in that place for that time. And I am sure Mary probably told them about the angel arriving and telling her that she would have this son. And Joseph probably said that he had this dream, and in this dream I was to call him Emmanuel. And they would have heard all of this, and then they couldn't contain themselves, and they went out and they told everyone they could find. They were the first gospel evangelists. Later we see the same action after the resurrection of Jesus. Like I said, Luke loves to mirror. And we read in Luke 24, 1-9, and this is just after the resurrection of Jesus. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood before them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee. The Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again." Then they remembered his words, and when they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and all the others. We again get this unlikely group of people being given the message, an angel appearing, because giving the message to the women seems unlikely. Surely it would have been one of the 11 disciples that were there, or it would have been one of the 3 that were really close with Jesus. But no, it was the women who were going out that the angels appeared to and gave that message to. And when they heard it, they couldn't help but race back and tell everyone what they'd heard. The shepherds are a foreshadowing of the disciples that Jesus would call to follow him, to take his message to the world. It was a foreshadowing that God was going to choose ordinary people with ordinary stories, and then God would use them in extraordinary ways. He didn't pick people from the priest class because We've seen, if you look around in the world now, you can see how churches already elevate people like that already. So imagine if they had been priests that they appeared to. God chose ordinary people because he wanted to partner with us, people who were just people. So it does raise a question, and maybe you're questioning whether God could take someone like you, could take someone with your level of brokenness and sin and use you for amazing purposes. And the answer is simply yes. It doesn't matter where we are. God can use us. He can take us because we are all broken to a degree. We all struggle with things. We all sin and fall short of the glory of God. And he can take us and he can use us for the extraordinary. All it takes is for us to be obedient. In that moment when God calls us and he asks us to go, it needs us to be obedient, to acknowledge his calling and be obedient. And things shift when that happens. Probably the biggest example I have of this is I was struggling with what I was going to do. And this was a number of years ago, and I'd been studying and I'd been doing a few things, and I could not figure out what God had for me. I had an idea, but I was afraid to put it into words, is probably the best way of putting it. And the moment that I spoke it out and I said, this is what I am called to be, his peace fell on me. A peace, and it just flooded through me. My whole body tingled and shaked, and I just felt so at peace. But in that moment, I was obedient to him. And he went to me, I know that you are not perfect. I know that there are things that you need to deal with. I know that there's struggles, but I am going to use you because I have called you and I will equip you. And it is the same for us, whether it is something small in our mind or something big. When he calls us, he will equip us. We just need the obedience to say yes. We just need the obedience to take that step. We need the obedience to heed that call because God is always talking to us. There's always something he's laying on our heart. We just need to be willing to take that step. When we give God our yes, he will call us out of our comfort zone. I guarantee it. I'm not even going to hypothesize on this. If you step into your calling with God, you are going to be out of your comfort zone. There are going to be things that you're going to think, I can't do this. I'm not comfortable. This isn't what I should be doing. And God's going to go, but that's what I need you to do, so step out and do it. He only asks that we seek to be obedient to him in the process, that we push in with him, that we seek him, that we stand with him, that we draw from him, that he becomes our strength, that he becomes the source of our wisdom, that we don't try and do it on our own because then we will fall over and fail. He is the one who will guide, convict, refine, and lead us on a path of everlasting life. One manger says so much. It leads us to so much. It points to so much. Its value is invaluable. So today, maybe this needs to be a prayer. And this is from Psalm 139, 23 and 24. And it says this, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me to the way everlasting." David, who wrote this, was said to have a relationship with God that was like no other, but his relationship with the Father was still separate. There was still a division there because he was living in the old covenant. We have intimate access to the Father. So when we say things like this and we ask the Lord to search us, we ask him to test us, he's doing it at a personal level. He's going to be doing it from the inside out. See if there's any offensive way in my heart. He knows, he's there, he sees, but he doesn't condemn us in that. He goes, let me walk with you as you overcome that. Let me give you the strength to push through that and lead me to the way everlasting, which is where he wants us to be. That was the whole purpose Jesus came and was born and laid in a manger, was so that he would grow and he would become an example. He would die on the cross and lead us to that way everlasting. So as we close, we're going to sing one last song. But I just want to invite you to spend a bit of time in prayer and self-reflection. Where are you with Jesus today? Where is he sitting with you? Are you in a good place with him and can you just sit there and celebrate? Does he feel distant and you can't hear his voice? Are you resisting him? Has he been telling you something and you're going, oh, I might just do that? So let's just spend a bit of time as we come into our last song, just to reflect. And we're going to sing Waymaker because Jesus is our Waymaker. I was at Frankston yesterday and we were just stood near the food court there, and a lady walked past with a big jumper on with Waymaker all over it. He is my Waymaker. And all I could do was smile because it is so true. Jesus makes a way. When we can't see it, he makes a way. When we can't get to that place, he leads us to that place. So this morning, we just spend a little bit of time reflecting, and then we'll come into this song, and then we'll head into our week knowing that Jesus is our Waymaker.